Hi, in section 1.7 we're talking about multiplication and division of real numbers. What is the sign of the product when two negative numbers are multiplied? Correct, that would be a positive. So in the first one, multiply. Negative 1/3 times negative 5/7. So now we need to think back to our multiplying of fractions rules. And that's right, we multiply the numerators, then multiply the denominators. Now in this case, if we have a negative times a negative, we know it's going to be a positive. Then we have to take the 1 times 5 over 3 times 7. Make sure nothing cancels, which nothing does, so we have 5/21. Letter B. We have a negative 4 times a negative 6 times a negative 1 times a negative 2. If you need to, do this in two parts. Negative 4 times negative 6 would be a positive 24. Negative 1 times 2 would be a positive 2. 24 times 2, right, is 48. Again, if we have four negatives there, we know that they're all going to cancel and it's going to be a positive. And letter C, we have negative 3 to the 4th power. That'd be negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. You can do the same thing we just did in the previous one. Do two at a time. Negative 3 times negative 3 would be a positive 9. So that would also give us a positive 9. 9 times 9, 81. The product of an even number of a negative factors is what? Well, we just saw that up here. If you have an even number of negative factors, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, right, your answer will always be positive. But what if we have an odd number of negative factors? Well, let's see. That would be something like negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1. Well, if we started with negative 1 times negative 1 would be a positive 1, multiply that by a negative, so it would end up as a negative value. Let's review the multiplicative property of 0. The multiplicative property of 0 states whenever you have a number, we're going to use a number a here. If we multiply it by 0, what will we get? Right, we'll always get 0 here. It doesn't matter what we multiply by, and we multiply it by 0, it'll always get 0. Negative 3.75 times 0 is still going to be 0. So this is the multiplicative property of 0. Keep in mind, we also have the additive identity and the multiplicative identity, which are different from this. And the last thing we have on this page, it just says the rules for signs for division are the same as those for multiplication. Okay, so divide, check using your calculator. Now, the first one, 14 divided by negative 7. You could also set this problem up as 14 divided by negative 7. That way you can see it in a vertical and a horizontal format. Now we'll see if you have 14 divided by negative 7, right, we're left here with a negative 2. If you're unsure, you can do a tiny bit of work here. You could do 2 times 7 is 14, and this could be a negative 1 times 7. The 7's cancel. 2 over negative 1 would be negative 2. Letter B, negative 34 over 4. Again, just like I showed you in the previous one, if you need to, you could do a step of work in here as a negative 1 times 4 times 8, and then negative 1 times 4. You can always approach it that way. You'll say that cancels, you'll see that cancels, we're left with the value of 8. Last but not least, 0 divided by negative 17. You're right, that is going to be 0. Now, division involving 0. These are two concepts that students tend to get mixed up. Now, what I want you to do is type these into your calculator just as you see them. So for this one, you're going to type 0 divided by negative 2. And what your calculator give you? 0, correct. However, when you type this in your calculator, 5 divided by 0, what does it tell you? Right, you're getting an error message. That's because we cannot divide by 0. Therefore, the answer here would be undefined. Anytime you're dividing something by 0, it will be undefined. What I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and work through the next 3 problems here. This is stuff we've done before. The only difference now is we're involving more negatives. So go ahead and work through these and see how you do with them. Okay, with the first one, you have a negative times a negative, so you know your answer is going to be positive, so I don't even bring the negatives through the problem. We know that these two things are being multiplied together, so it'd be 4 times 7, 5 times 3, which would be 28/15. Now this next one, we want to be careful with all the negatives going on here. Keep in mind the placement of the negative does not matter. So in this first one, negative 2 over 7, that could be written as negative 2 over a positive 7 or a positive 2 over negative 7. As long as there's only one negative sign, all three of these would have the same value. And if you're ever unsure about that, you can type it into your calculator. Now, when we work through these, you'll see that I wrote the negatives with the numerators because that's the number that will be applying the negative portion. We don't want that negative with the denominator because that's not going to help us at all. So you can see I rewrote it as negative 2 over 7 plus negative 9 over 7. Negative 2 plus a negative 9 is negative 11 over 7. And then the last one, we're dividing, so you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 3/10 is 10 over 3. And then what I did in the next step here is I rewrote 10 is 2 times 5. I rewrote 4 is 2 times 2. So it's a negative 3 times 2 times 5, and then a 2 times 2 times 3. The 3's cancel, 2's cancel. You're left with a negative 5/2. Okay, and the last page here. This is stuff that we've done before. Example 4, find the reciprocal of each number if it exists. Recall from section 1.3, two numbers are reciprocals of each other if what? Right, okay, so we know that it means they have to be flipped from one another. So for example, if you have 2/3 and 3/2, they would be reciprocals. But what did we say if you multiply them? Right, you always get 1. So two numbers are reciprocals of if what? If, remember, their product is 1, a positive 1. So now we have negative 27, you can think of that over 1, so the reciprocal would be, right, a negative 1 over 27. Negative 3 over 4 would be 4 over negative 3. Again, the placement of the negative doesn't matter. Negative 5 over 1 would be negative 1/5 would be a negative 5 over 1. However, we don't write the 1 in the denominator, so we would just write it as a negative 5. And last but not least, we have 0 over 1. Well, if we tried to take the reciprocal of that, we'd have 1 over 0, which would leave us undefined, so there does not exist. There is no reciprocal for 0. So this does not exist. Okay, and the last idea here, we want to be very, very careful with this because you will see this again and students tend to miss a lot of points on this. We want to tell whether the expression, so this expression right here, if this represents a positive or negative number when m and n are negative. So they're saying, okay, if we substitute in any negative value for n and m, what will this be if we simplify it, negative or positive? The easiest way I can tell you to try to work through this is to pick values for m and n. So we know m is equal to some negative and n is equal to negative. I'm going to say let's use negative 2 and negative 3. It does not matter as long as in this case the m and n are negative. Some problems will give you one positive, one negative. You just need to read carefully. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the same problem that I see. So negative n minus m, multiplying it by n over m. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute these values into this expression, and I'm going to do it one at a time. I'm going to start with the n. So here I need to put the value in here. Now keep in mind, my n is negative 3. So I have to substitute a negative 3 here and a negative 3 here. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to substitute in a negative 2 for each of those m's. So a negative 2 and a negative 2. Now you will notice when I did this, I did not erase this negative and I did not erase the subtraction sign which were given to us. And you want to be very, very careful with that. Now we're not going to be entirely concerned with the numerical value of our answer. We just want to figure out if it's going to be a negative or positive. So let's go ahead and start thinking through this problem. Well, the first thing, we have minus a negative. That's going to be a positive value. We also have a negative here multiply by a -3. So that'd be like the opposite of a -3, which would leave us with a +3, and then that would be +2. And then you're multiplying this by, well, -3 divided by a -2, well, negative divided by a negative would be a positive. So now you can look to see what this answer is going to give us. A 3 plus 2 is going to be a +5 times this 3/2. In the end, we're not concerned with the numerical value. All we know is that your answer here would be a positive value, and that is what we're looking at. So again, with these problems, it makes it easiest if you just substitute some values in that are appropriate to the problem and then simplify it from there. That's all we have for section 1.7. Please reach out if you have any questions.